fellow patriots, my fellow Christians, liberty-loving Americans. We're living in some really interesting times, and just trying to encapsulate these ideas that have been coming to me lately, with just trying to keep tabs on everything going on in the world. I mean, that's impossible, obviously. Anybody out there who's ever tried that has quickly realized that, there's just so much information hitting us from so many different angles right now that it's impossible to keep track of everything going on. And I think that's part of the tactic of the enemy, is just to keep the people of the world so confused. The adversary that's been studying mankind for thousands of years, he knows that we have our limits, and we're finite. We're all too human. We can only handle so much information at once, without just completely either, which is probably the most common thing to do, is just to tune out, right? Just to it's too complicated, it's too complex to ever be able to really get a finger on what is truth and what is lies. So let's just give up and let's just tune out and get lost in fantasy, flip on the Netflix and get lost in fantasy worlds. Alternate realities, right? Universes. In a land far, far away, in a time far distant future. But our only point of power to affect change in our own lives and the world around us is right here now, in this moment. And these moments are fleeting, right? They're just, and weeks go by like days. Months go by like weeks, years go by like a month, and it's really hard to just. I think that's also part of the psychological manipulation right now. It's just because there's so much information hitting us, and we don't even have time to slow down and evaluate. What is really going on, And just within our own little spheres, that's one danger, is that with all this information continually hitting us, we don't just tune out of the information now and then and appreciate all the blessings around us, and the family and our pets. I don't know, just the all the beauty in nature. Just go out for a hike. Get out in the garden. How many people are gardening right now? Well, you should be, and I know I should be doing it better. And it's one thing that I failed to do this summer, and it was right at spring, right at the beginning of I started cataloging our what I called our doomsday garden, just kind of jokingly. Some officers going by. I don't want to get pulled over. Good officers, good sheriffs. I'm not wearing a seatbelt, but hopefully they'll be forgiving, show me some grace. I'm always getting distracted when I'm talking. The short little series I did, the Doomsday Garden, I had all these high hopes at the start of the year that we're going to get this big hoop house up on the parent-in-law's property with a fresh spring coming out of the ground, and we're going to get serious. We're going to produce a lot of food this year. And it really didn't pan out. I mean, we got some supplementary, veg, and we still got a lot to harvest. We got a ton of potatoes, or I'm assuming we have a ton of potatoes just ripe for the harvest. But realistically, pretty slim pickings overall. I don't know why. We really hit it hard. Some years it's just weird, like things just don't want to grow. And I'm sure a big part of it's the soil. Like, yeah, we're not by any means experts. So we're still trying to perfect the craft, the trade, whatever. It's not a trade, but the art of gardening up in high elevation Rocky Mountains. But where's I going with all this again? Getting lost. My own little mind space. This message was originally intended just for fellow Christians, because I've recently heard some news from Jamaica, and I think it's really interesting. Speaking of living in biblical times, and just literally, I don't know how you can't wake up at this point, like, and get serious about your faith if you call yourself a Christian, especially a Bible-based, Bible-believing, Bible-reading, hopefully Christian. And we all could get better at that. Personally, I could spend more time reading the Bible than I spend reading headlines every day. But when I read headlines, it's like I'm always seeing things. It's just impossible anymore for me not to do. I see everything through a biblical lens and prophetic lens, and every day it's just screaming from the headlines, prophecy. And we're literally living in the pages of Revelation right now. And so let me get to my main point for starting this chit chat as I drive down the mountain today. So we've been to several different churches throughout the years. We've met some great people, and the fun part is when you go to different churches, you get to meet people visiting from all different parts of the world. We met South Africans, Nigerians, all over the place. Asia, Czech. There's recently I met a guy from Romania. Very interesting language if you try to listen to them. Make any sense of what they're saying. It just sounds like garble, like babble. Which is what happened at the Tower of Babel, right? All the languages were scrambled. And we see today them trying to build the same concept. Apparently with the human DNA this time. I don't know if you saw that building that Jeff Bezos wants to put up, but it's basically a ziggurat, a Tower of Babel. Modern looking, but it looks like a double helix of DNA, and it's like, you see this messaging all over the place. There's a recent magazine, I forgot the name because it's German. It's a German magazine, and I haven't done a video on it yet, but I plan on it. And they picture the EU with a big giant E and a U as the Tower of Babel, being battered by the waves. And the waves inside the ocean have all the currencies, all the different fiat paper money within the ocean, battering the ziggurat or the Tower of Babel that is the EU. And it's about the coronavirus pandemic. And they love using their symbols like that, just throwing them in our face. It's like, are you paying attention, Christians? You should know this stuff, Christians. And I know they can get away with it in a country like the EU. It's not a country, but Europe. They can get away with it because it's such a secular. It's gone from the center of Protestantism, or in the Protestant Revolution, or Reformation, sorry. Protestant Reformation that led to the French Revolution. Europe used to be a very Christian continent. Let's put it that way. But now they're so secular that they can get away with just like when they picture the EU on a coin as a woman riding a bull. Yeah, scantily dressed woman riding a bull or a beast. I don't know if you've seen that yet, but the coins that they, I don't know if they actually ever minted them or if it was just a concept coin. Yeah, literally a woman on a beast for the EU. The EU flag, by the way, has a... Anyway, I'm going off topic. That's for another show. The stars, how they relate to the image of the Catholicism, Mary with the stars around her head, or the woman in Revelation. So for my fellow Christians, I've heard recently reports from Jamaica, and all the churches, they have a council of churches in Jamaica, and they've all gotten together. It doesn't matter what denomination you are. You know, you can be one of these more fringe denominations. All of the different Protestant churches, all of the different Catholic Archbishop was up there on stage. They were all together, and they're all telling their congregants to take the injections. What does that tell you? And there's big resistance over there because Jamaica is one of those countries that are, the people there are very, rightly so, skeptical of leadership, and they're big into health. The different church members that I've talked to are very conservative. Even the way they dress, you know, they come over here and they're like, man, women are dressing like hoes over here, basically. They're very conservative, they're very modest, but they're very serious about the Bible and their faith and trying to remain faithful to God. So I see these other countries, like in Africa, there's a lot, but in Jamaica in particular right now, they're like ground zero for, they've had lockdowns for forever now. I was reading articles after I heard about this, and they had weekly lockdowns at first, and then the logic in the article was like, well, since all the local economy, local manufacturers, local businesses, I think Red Stripe was even one of them, beer manufacturer, since they're so since they've been harmed so much from all these lockdown measures, you know, we're going to make a compromise, and we're going to go from, they've had weekly lockdowns. I think it was like Thursday through, I forgot now, Thursday through Monday at first, or something like that. So they went from like weekly lockdowns to 3-day lockdown. Now just recently they're only saying we're going to have it only on Sunday, and they call it a no movement day, right? So everybody's got a lockdown on Sundays. And I think it's interesting, the dog training, right? It's like sit, right? Okay, how long do we have to sit for? Until we give you another treat. Until the government gives you another treat. And pats you on the back and says, good citizen. You know, we're all in this together. Just keep being a good citizen. Keep following orders. And so we've seen the training over this last summer. And they've kind of relaxed on us here in America over this summer. But in some countries, they're still full bore. You know, they're still all in on this, on these lockdown measures. So it's this incrementalism, and it's this spectrum of tyranny, you know, based upon your system of government, based upon people's tolerance for tyranny. There's a different level of spectrum of lockdown measures, mandates, you know. just insane. And if people don't see the prophetic fulfillment in this current push to force, to compel, eventually it'll be an issue of worship. And I've heard a lot of these arguments that, you know, it's the jab, that's the mark. I do not see how that completely fulfills the necessary requirements to be the actual mark of the beast. The mark of the beast must infringe upon at least one of the laws of God, the 10 commandment moral law of God. And that's how it's always been. Like there's types and antitypes, there's shadows, the fulfillments. The Old Testament is full of these shadows and types of, you know, history repeats. And like Solomon says, there's nothing new under the sun. Sorry if I'm not looking too much, but I'm trying not to kill myself. A lot of traffic today. Try to look at the camera a little more often, but so one of the main key types or shadows of the beast and his image and his mark is the story of the fiery furnace, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And what did the religious leaders, what did they do? They tried to find fault with God's people, and they tried to find a way to make them stand out, to set them up, and they turned the king against them. And the king said, you know, he had this dream, and the dream was interpreted by Daniel. Oops, I just lost my water. And the dream said that his kingdom was the head of gold. But there's other kingdoms that'll follow. And Nebuchadnezzar was like, oh, hell no. My kingdom's going to last forever, right? Because that's always the mindset of a tyrant, of a dictator. So he built a image of solid, or was it solid or just plated? I can't remember. Image of gold. And he commanded everybody, you know, when all the musicians started up, everybody from the surrounding nations would come, bow down, give reverence to that image. That was symbolic of his never-ending kingdom, and ultimately his giant-sized head. Puts a new perspective on having a big head, right? And so the king was put in a position where he had to, in order to maintain his own credibility even, he had to force these three little Hebrew boys to show their allegiance, right? Whether they believed it or not, they had to show some outward sign that they worshipped this false god, this false image. And I've heard it described that those different measurements of that statue equal out to 666. And so it came down to the breaking of, you know, thou shalt not bow down and worship graven images. That's literally what he tried to force Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to do. And they would not. They made that stand against an earthly king to be obedient to God and his commandments, his laws. So when it comes down to the mark, there will be a repeat of that same scenario. And I think it's interesting how they wouldn't even eat at the king's table. So it came down to, before they were tested with a fiery furnace, which God ultimately saved them from, in the form of Jesus actually appearing in the fiery furnace that was, I think it was heated 10 times hotter than normal, right? So there's no way, and there's no other parallel to the fire that will come to cleanse the earth at the end of time. And God's people that are protected by the blood of the Lamb, that have his robes of righteousness on, be there, the only one standing on that sea of glass when everything else is burned up. So we're seeing a lot of parallels. Yeah, they were tested on diet. So they were tested on what they put into their bodies before the real test came, right? The fiery furnace test. So it's interesting how, on some level, there is kind of a dividing right now. The sheep and the goats, the wheat and the chaff, wheat and the tares. With what we put in our bodies, and I'm not saying that's the final decision. Like, you might have already got your injection. And I don't care what you had done to your body personally. I care when you have the tools of the state trying to force me to do it personally. I gotta pull over. Cops flying by. Ooh, he's in a hurry. See, I don't care, what your personal medical choice was. I don't think, you're lost if you got injected with this gene therapy. But ultimately, if you follow that road of just compliance to the state, to the worldly pressures, to those psychological nudges, like de Blasio in New York, he's offering all the delicacies of that little cesspool of New York City. You can have everything you want if you just line up and get the jab. There goes a fire truck. So it's like the devil's argument, right? Like temptation in the wilderness. You can have all the kingdoms of the world, the devil said to Jesus, if you just bow down and worship me. So it comes down to that issue, that key point of being faithful to God and His commandments. And I think that I've heard it described like this, there's two pressures right now on the people of the world. There's the pressure to receive the mind of the beast, right? You see these people that are just like militant and just authoritarian tyrants getting up in people's face, trying to shame them publicly for not wearing a mask in a store. So you're getting the one pressure to have the mind of the beast that will ultimately lead to forced worship or death sentence. And then there's another pressure, the seal of God, right? The classical image of a seal is when you had a letter and you'd have like hot wax with a little stamp that would impress a little initial or whatever in the wax to seal that letter. So God's people right now are being sealed in the forehead, in the mind, with God's character. And what does God's character look like? It looks like His 10 Commandment moral law. Jesus was the Word become flesh. The Word meaning at the time the Old Testament, the Torah. And what did Jesus say to the rich young ruler that asked, how do I inherit the kingdom? He said, keep the commandments. And He said, if you love me, keep my commandments. That's the dividing line, right? It's not just the hearers of the word, but the doers of the word that make true followers, true Christians. Anyway, that's my rant. I know I've gone too long already, but my call is today that just fellow Christians, we need to start waking up. We still got it pretty good in this country, but there's countries right now that are severely being tested. And they don't have the rights that we have. But you know what? Those rights that we have are more and more just looking pretty superficial and think very quickly, everything can be just tossed out. If there's enough fear, and that's why we've been told, when you see all these fearful things on the earth, do not fear, because when we fear, we lose sight of who God is. And fear is not a faith, and fear leads you to look to worldly leaders to take those fears away. And that is a dangerous thing right now, because we know that all of these men and women in office are just following basically the guidance of the serpent right now, of the dragon. They're not acting on their own. They're following orders from evil people that are pushing for a broader agenda than just public health, And ultimately it'll come down to who you worship. And are you faithful to God? And will you remain true to His laws, to His word, to His will? And the devil seeks to make you falter, compromise. He wants us all compromised. He doesn't want a faithful people, because a faithful people is, his biggest nightmare, basically. And ultimately, all these people that just go along out of fear and comply and join this collective, this push for we're all in this together, And we're seeing this on the religious front, political front, financial. There's all these prongs that control people's lives on different levels. And if we do not more and more disconnect from those little hooks, the 501c3 churches, church corporations, that's why they are in Jamaica. That's why they're compelling their flocks to line up and get injected, because they're corporations. They have to. They have to follow the orders of the state, or they have massive lawsuits on their hands. So they got a lot to protect. They got a lot invested in this world, and that's key. The more we have invested in this world, the more we're going to be willing to compromise. And there's I think a reason why Jesus was penniless and His disciples were pretty much penniless. What little they had, they divided up amongst themselves, and it was just for basic necessities. And I think the end times church is going to follow in the same footsteps as the early church. And I think very shortly we're all going to be kind of having to go underground. We're going to have to meet in desolate places. And unfortunately, I don't think we're going to have YouTube channels, and we're not going to be able to communicate on these big tech platforms anymore, because it's not just going to be about censoring medical misinformation. It's going to be about censoring biblical truth. And so that's my rant. I just had to get all that out. Things are happening, and it's really easy to fall back asleep, especially when we have all this prosperity in this country. But I just want people to realize that there are people that are severely having their faith tested right now in countries like Jamaica, and it's getting real, real fast. And I think it's coming here faster than we'd like to admit. And we're quickly going to be tested on how faithful we want to remain to God versus the kings and the powers of this world. And thanks for watching, everybody. I know I went on long today, but I had a lot to say. So God bless. Stay strong in the faith. And I'll be in touch. I'll see you.